I'm delighted to say I'm joined once again by the legendary commentator himself, John Gwynne. Thanks again for the time, John. How you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. Obviously saddened because it's a very sad week because Sid was a great friend of mine, a great colleague. We worked together for a long time, and I know we're going to talk about the great man.
Yeah, we definitely are. It is a special week, really, in the darts world. Of course, Sid would have been 80 years old on Monday, and today, when we're talking on this Tuesday, it's the 8-year anniversary of his passing. And we'll start off, really, of course, he joined the Sky Sports team working on the commentary in 1994, but before then, working with the Indoor League and then the BDO doing their World Championship, the first one from 1978 up to 1994. But when did you first come across Sid?
Obviously, I heard him on the television, and he was, let's just say, idiosyncratic, because A, of his Geordie accent, and B, of some of the descriptions that he came out with. And of course, when he worked on the BBC, he worked as a sole commentator. They didn't work as a pair. There was only one commentator in the box. It was either Sid or Tony Green. He worked for the BBC for 17 years, from 78, the first World Championship, to 94, which was the first PDC World Championship, but Sid wasn't at that one. He was still with the BBC. And Dave Lanning and I did the very first WDC World Championship. But I came across Sid at the Lakeside, because I used to go there and cover the Embassy World Championship for BBC's Radio Sport, what is now Radio 5 Live. When I started in 1990, it was my first visit to the Lakeside was 89, but I started working with the BBC the following year. Obviously came across Sid then. I had met him in the corridors of the BBC in Manchester before that, but spoke to him very briefly then and introduced myself to him. But yes, I used to play pool with him at the Lakeside in the hotel, and we used to a certain extent, we used to get on okay together, and of course later we became colleagues.
Yeah, it definitely did. That first tournament, you three together, you, Sid and Dave Lanning, working for Sky, the World Match Play at Blackpool 1994. What are your memories of those early days working together, you three?
It was unbelievable, really, because we were way up in the gods at the back of the Empress Ballroom there. You had to go up several feet of steps past pigeons and whatever they'd left lying around, and we were way up in the gods. So if someone wanted to make use of the toilet at any time, you had to be pretty nifty between sets when there were commercial breaks. And on one occasion I didn't get back, and the producer said, "Where's Gwynne?" He said, "Oh, he'll be back in a minute. He's just got to pay a visit." And Sid made up some excuse. I'd also called in on the way back to see one or two racing results. But and Sid, Dave and I had some great fun at Blackpool. We did in 94. And in fact, on the day of the final was on the Saturday night. During the daytime, Sky had a summer special program, and the summer sport, and they presented it on this occasion from the Winter Gardens. They said, we'll have Sid, John and Dave on stage singing "I'm in heaven when I see you smile, smile for me, my Diane." And from the Bachelors were on at the Grand Theatre just down the road, and we went there and met them, and they gave us a little bit of tuition. And I can't believe that Sid, Dave and they were the chorus behind me, and I was the main sort of singer live on television. I mean, that's crazy, but we had some great fun at Blackpool, and it carried on. And in fact, Blackpool was Sid's first tournament in 1994. It was also his last full tournament. He did one or two Premier League games after that, but he was ill in 2012. But the 2011 World Match Play was his last full tournament.
And of course, you three formed a great team in the commentary box from those early days of the WDC, now the PDC. Best part of 20 years working together on Sky, and for many long-time darts fans who were around during that era, they'll rate you three as the best commentary team that darts has seen. I mean, what are the standout memories for you during that time?
For me, the 2007 World Championship, and Sid and I were in the club for the second half of that. Dave started with Sid and I finished off, and Barney was so far behind. The producer said, "Gwynne, you better get in the box. This game's not going to last as long as we thought." Of course, it's lasted forever, because Barney fought back magnificently. And I'll never forget that, sitting with Sid on that. But there's so many occasions where I sat next to Sid, and indeed Dave, but Sid, it was very, very special. There's no doubting, however professional and however good Dave and I might have been, and I think we did a good job, and we did our best. Sid was way ahead. His mode of thought, the way that you could almost feel him thinking when you were sitting next to him, and he would come out with some of the most, as you know, amazing expressions. Now, whether he thought of them before and he was bringing them in, or whether and certainly would use them more than once, obviously. For instance, that's the greatest comeback since Lazarus. The first time we heard that when he was with the BBC. That's brilliant, and why not use it again on occasion? And there were other examples as well. But you could almost, sitting next to Sid, you could always feel him thinking. And I learned a lot from him. I observed much of the way in which he worked, and learned a lot from him, because he did tell me once, he said, if it isn't adding to the pictures, then it really isn't worth mentioning. And I never forgot that, and I always was conscious after that of trying not to state the blindingly obvious, because the pictures tell the viewer that, and really to rather add to it. That was a gem of a piece of advice from Sid, which I think enhanced my own commentary. And there were so many other occasions when we bounced off each other very, very well. He bounced off anybody he was working with, Sid. He was very clever, very skillful. But I do believe that he and I had a rather special relationship in the box, and we had some great fun bouncing off each other. And it was generally Sid bouncing off me, but occasionally it would be the other way around, and Sid would acknowledge it, and occasionally he'd say, "I wish I'd said that, Johnny boy," and it made me feel quite proud.
So many great games you called together over the years. One of the best moments, though, it's got to be when Sid was with Dave calling the first live 9-darter in the UK, the first one on Sky, Phil Taylor, in 2002 at the World Match Play. Of course, you would have been there at the Winter Gardens that night. What was it like being at the Winter Gardens?
Yes, the remarkable thing about that was it was the last game in the afternoon, I think. I was on there were 3 games in the afternoon and 3 in the evening. I was on the first and second game in the afternoon, and then I wasn't on again, the Taylor Mason game Sid and Dave did, and I wasn't on again until either game 2 or game 3 in the evening, maybe 2 and 3, but I certainly had a large interval, if you like, or interlude. So it being a nice summer day, August the 2nd, 2002, I decided I would go out up to the hotel, change, and go and sunbathe on the front. And eventually I got back to I went back to the hotel, changed back into my working clothes, my suit, not suit, but and I got there, and as I was coming into the Winter Gardens, someone said, "Brilliant 9-darter, that from Taylor." I said, "You what? You're joking?" He said, "No, Taylor's done a 9-darter. Oh, the first live 9-darter on British television." And I wasn't there to witness it. That's typical, isn't it? But it was a great commentary from Sid and Dave. I mean, they both nurtured that moment and really made the most of it. They did it full credit. It was great.
One of the games that people will most remember, of course, you and Sid being in the box together, and you touched on it as well, was that 2007 World Final between Phil Taylor and Raymond van Barneveld, and you two calling it in that sudden death leg. I mean, what was it like being there at the Circus Tavern that night? And it was a game that many people still talk about today and as regard it as one of the best games ever.
Well, because I've alluded to it already, but it was special, and it was the build-up. The fact that it started, as I'd mentioned, on a very flat note. Barney just didn't turn up for 3 sets. He was 3-0 down. It took him 21 legs it took him 11 or 12 legs to hit his first 180, and then he ended up hitting 21. But the atmosphere at the Circus Tavern was remarkable anyway, and it was very sort of compact, enclosed. Of course, in those days there was cigarette smoking allowed indoors, and so it was always very smoky, notwithstanding the smoke that came obviously from the stage when they did the intros. I know they don't do it anymore. So there was a special atmosphere. Literally, the atmosphere wasn't great, but in terms of the crowd involvement and the closeness of the crowd compared to other big venues, if you sat near the front, you could almost talk to the players. Yeah, it was great that night, but it was one of many, many great nights at the Circus Tavern, at the Winter Gardens, and of course we also had other tournaments. I remember Sid and Dave and I being up in Ayr for the first ever World Pairs in 1995 at Butlins in Ayr, and our hotel was in the town itself. But Butlins a couple of miles out of town, and Dave and Sid were in my car. I was driving. We were driving to the venue, and we could almost all three of us have gone at the same time because there was a hidden crossroads. And by hidden crossroads, I mean I was going down this road. It wasn't signposted. I went straight across and almost was hit by a wagon, which was travelling pretty quickly. I guess here I was as well. And we sort of, you know, you do with relief, you all sort of laugh and, oh, blimey, that was a close call at such a move. And we really could all have been goners back in 1995 in one fell swoop, and we often talked about that. We had some great times. And another, of course, for Sid and I, they didn't come, but there's the Las Vegas Desert Classic, the first of which was 2002. We did 8 on the trot. The last one was 2009. And we had some great times out there as well in Vegas. I mean, they were special, no doubt about it. Yes, I will fondly remember Sid, obviously because we worked together for 17 years. I might have mentioned this before, but he was 17 years with the BBC and BDO, and 17 years with the Sky and the PDC. You can't really get more sort of equitable than that, can you? It's coincidence, I know, and but for illness, he'd probably still be blasting out now over the airwaves, and more's the pity that he isn't.
Yeah, I mean, you had a special relationship with Sid. I mean, great understanding in the commentary box as well, but across those 17 years being cooped up in that commentary box, was there any times that you guys had a falling out or a difference of opinion?
Well, never in the box itself, no. But Sid did have a habit of butting in, and I mean that he wasn't in any way ill-mannered, but he was so impulsive. As I've already mentioned, you could almost feel his mind working overtime all the time. It was almost like clockwork. And thinking of the next thing to say, and if something came to his mind, not always, but often it would come out. and it would come out and it would interrupt. It would interrupt. I'm not saying I didn't interrupt him from time to time, but I was always careful, tried not to. And one day, it was when we were working at Bognor Regis. I mentioned the World Pairs at Ayr in '95. Well, this was '97, 2 years later. We'd had the '96 pairs were at the Willows at Salford, and which is quite close to where I live. It was very handy for me. And in '97 we were at Butlins in Bognor Regis, and it was when Barney and Shelton won it. Even though they were BDO boys came into the WDC tournaments on occasions, and Barney and Shelton were outcasts almost, and they were treated by many like that. But I won't go into that in too much depth. And they won it. But on one occasion, the producer really had a go at he'd had a go at Sid about this putting in. And Sid said to me, John, we better make sure we don't cross each other on commentary. And I said, fair enough, Sid. And as I've already said, sometimes I did it myself. It's something you can't avoid sometimes. But he continued to do it. Not because he was ill-mannered, as I say. His impulses were such that at times he couldn't stop himself. And I accepted that. There was occasions where I thought, let me finish what I'm saying. But more often than not, I just think that's how he was, and that's what made him what he was. His wonderful inventiveness and impulsiveness. And the following night in the bar, when he said, John, he said, I've had a word with Rory, our producer. We're still crossing. He said, you must stop interrupting. I said, Sid, with all the best will in the world, I said, I'm trying my hardest and I think I've succeeded. But I said, you're unaware of the fact that you're interrupting me on occasions. And I'm afraid he didn't take too kindly to that. And didn't speak for a couple of days. But that was never going to last long, was it? And as I say, that was in '97. And then in '99, one of them, what a brilliant story about Sid. And then, it was Phil Taylor against Rod Harrington at the casino rooms in Rochester, Kent. And it was the first or the second ever World Grand Prix. We'd had the World Pairs in '95, '96 and '97, and they were replaced by the World Grand Prix in '98 onwards. And for the first 2 years, they were held in the casino rooms in Rochester. And in the '99 semi-final, Phil Taylor's, he's got the double start, he's got 2 treble 20s, 160, and he hits 180. And Sid is absolutely going spare. He's sitting to my right, and he's going absolutely spare, but unaware, or we were aware of how close we were to the stage. But obviously, again, I say that impulsiveness, that desire to really let rip on occasions. And he was, Taylor's on a 9 dart, and the first ever with a double start. And Phil Taylor got the treble 20. Then he stood back and said, what's the treble 17? What's the treble? And he stood back. And Sid's unaware. He's looking at the monitor. I'm looking out of the window and can see Phil Taylor. And I very carefully I say, Sid, he can hear you. He can hear you. Well, Sid looked up, and when he realised, he was absolutely flabbergasted. He went back on his chair. He dropped his mic to his knees, and I had to take over a la Ted Lowe. And so Taylor wants the treble 17. And And he got it, treble set, and now he wants the bullseye for a 9-dart finish, the first ever in the World Grand Prix, the first ever with a double start, and he hit the 25. And Sid got back up, if you like. He hadn't exactly fallen off his chair, but he slunk back on it. And and I just patted him on the back. Don't worry, don't. And he thought that he had denied Phil Taylor the 9-darter. But I said, Sid, look, Phil got treble 17. And then it was perfectly quiet. He missed the ball. And that's exactly what Phil said afterwards. And Phil, to his credit, he was absolutely right. It wasn't a case of being magnanimous. It was a case of being absolutely right. And he said, Sid, I could hear you. I stood back. You shut up, and I got the treble 17. He said, I missed the ball. He said, it wasn't because of you. And that was that. But it was a strange moment. Strange moment. So, there's been many times when things have happened, many of which I forget. But we bounced off each other lovely. One of my favourites was where it was Taylor playing, actually, and he went to 2 sets all, and I say, well, we're back to parity again, and he says, no, we do the parroting round here. A lovely line that came right on the top of his head, and you can't help but admire that, And as I say, I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot about techniques in commentary, not to state the blindingly obvious, and with due respect to some of the current commentators, on occasions they state the blindingly obvious, and I'm more aware of it because of what Sid said. I watch the darts still, and not sort of 24/7, but I watch key games. I think there's a good crop of commentators, and I think that many of the commentators that are still working would admit that Sid was good for them as well. I don't exclusively think that I'm the only one who benefited from him. But I do value Sid especially because I think we had a kind of special relationship in the box. Not outside of the box, although we were friends, but in the box there was that rapport between us. And I remember one morning I was having breakfast on a table with whomever possible, that Dave was there. Usually I had breakfast with Dave, and Sid had come and join us in his own good time. And he came down, whoever I was sitting with, he came across, Johnny boy, have a look at this. And he got the Times, the Times newspaper. And Giles Smith, I don't know whether he still does a column in the Times, but he was very, very good to darts. And he didn't report on the matches verbatim, but he would comment on various things, and it might be the referees, it might be the show in general, it might be the crowd, but he would occasionally home in on the commentary and do a piece on the commentary. And I've still got the newspaper somewhere in the house. I really don't know where it is cutting, and I may never find it. But it'll be in a page of a scrapbook hidden away, or in a program, or somewhere in a dusty corner. And he said, just look at this, and he read it out. And Giles Smith had done a précis on Sid and my commentary on a quarter-final match at Blackpool. And he finished by saying, surely there can be no better pairing in British sports commentary than that of Sid Waddell and John Gwynne. And he put them in the right order. Sid first, me second. No question about that. But and I said, I don't believe everything I read in the paper, Sid, rather sardonically. But very, very proud of that. And it meant a lot to Sid, meant a lot to me. So obviously there are many times when I think of him, and I have a very good reason for thanking Dave Lanning for a lot of what he did, but especially Sid, very special man.
A lovely comment, and you mentioned earlier the 2011 World Match Play. That was to be Sid's final full tournament that he did in the commentary box. It was not long after that he was sadly diagnosed with bowel cancer, and he underwent the treatment, and he was back commentating during some of the nights in the Premier League in 2012. But what was it like that period, not having Sid there towards the end of 2011, start of 2012, and then him coming back for a little bit?
Well, I remember the very first Premier League of 2012 was in Manchester, the arena, and the very first game was Phil Taylor against Adrian Lewis, and this was 2012, February 2012, and I didn't expect to see Sid there, but Dick Alex, his manager, had managed to bring him, because he wasn't well at all. He'd lost an enormous amount of weight, but he wore that Sid smile, and which bravely said, "I'm going to get through this if it's the last thing I do." And I suppose, in a literal sense, you know, that might have been the case. And they gave Sid and myself that very first game, Taylor and Adrian Lewis, and there's a picture of it which people can see that was taken at that game, and that was the first time I'd seen Sid since Blackpool. And the thing I remember most, apart from the game itself, where he wasn't his usual self, but he tried to be, and it was pleasing to have him there, was after he'd finished and he and Dick were walking away. Dick was sort of holding his arm, and it really made me feel sad, because he was just physically, and Sid was never a big fella. He was always a bit skinny and bony, but he was almost like a rag doll, really. And as he was walking away, and I thought to myself, my God, Sid, I hope you get better. But privately thought, it doesn't look as though he is going to get better. And of course, he lasted about another 6 months and died the day after his 72nd birthday. But whether he did any other Premier League that summer, or that spring, I should say, when I wasn't there, I didn't do them all. I'm not sure, but I think Manchester was local to him. He lived in Leeds, and it was before the Leeds arena was built and before they started doing them in Leeds. He might have gone to Sheffield and done the one there, I don't know, but I never forget that, when Sid was walking away, and it hurt me, to be honest, because he was a shadow of himself.
Sid's last commentary would be on the finals night of that Premier League, and as you mentioned, August of 2012, sadly passed away. Do you remember where you were when you found out that Sid had gone?
Yes. I was at Old Trafford Cricket Ground. Lancashire were playing Holland in a Cheltenham and Gloucester knockout cup game. But it was a game that was starting round about 3 o'clock. So they had a luncheon. They had a luncheon club, and when Lancashire were at home, I would host this luncheon club and be with a variety of sporting guests. And on this particular day, it was Peter Reid, the former Everton, Manchester City and Bolton Wanderers footballer in England, of course. I'm a big cricket fan, Peter, and a big darts fan, very big darts. I love watching the darts. And I interviewed Peter, no problem, one of the Dutch players came in, and I interviewed him because he was the professional cricketer at Burton Cricket Club in Manchester here, where I live, and the club I played for many years. And so I had a chat with him. He was actually, Australian, but he played for Holland, if I could put it that way. And the main interview was with Peter Reid. And when that finished, there were various things to do, like the raffle and the auction and, various things. And somebody in the... Oh, that's right, there was a former players' dinner in the next room, next to where we were, the point, partitioned off. And whilst we were having a little bit of a break, I went in, because I knew quite a few of the old Lancashire players. I covered the county for BBC Radio for many years. And it was nice to see them, and I was good. And one of them said to me, "That's bad news about Sid, isn't it?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, he died in the early hours of the morning." And I didn't know. And so obviously I went back eventually and finished my duties. But I did get a phone call from Sky Sports saying, "John, we've heard about Sid." I said, "Well, I've only heard about it in the last half hour or so." And they said, "Is there any chance you can come and do an interview from the studios in Wilmslow, which is just south of Manchester?" And I said, "Oh yes, I will." And I pointed out that once our luncheon was over, I said, "I shan't be joining you in the stands to watch the cricket." I said, "Although I may come back later." And I explained to Peter Reid, and he was very, very saddened to hear. Oh, he said, "We all knew Sid was ill, but it's still bad news, terrible news." And so I travelled down to Wilmslow, about half an hour away, to do this live interview for Sky Sports News. And it wasn't easy to do the interview because I was so saddened and upset. But I held myself together because it's what Sid would have wanted. And then, of course, his funeral a few days later in Pudsey. And the church in Pudsey, and the place was absolutely packed. Dave Lanning gave him a most wonderful tribute. I would have liked to have done the short tribute myself, but I was denied the chance, and I regret that. I would have only given it, I had a minute and a half, but no. Dick Alex said, "No, sorry, John," and that hurt me, I'll be honest. But I've got to say, Sid had a wonderful send-off. There was a great turnout. And then the wake was at Pudsey Cricket Club, Pudsey St Lawrence Cricket Club. Sid was very keen on cricket, and his son Daniel was a very good player, played for Yorkshire Colts. But it was at Pudsey Cricket Club, and it was great that Freddie Flintoff came along, and of course he did commentary with Sid and himself. That was another one. And when during the break, I said to Sid, because Freddie was sitting in between us, I said, "When they come back, drop your mic on your knee and just fold your arms." And that's what we did. The producer agreed. They came back, and Freddie took up the commentary. Sid and I just sat there looking at each other and said, "Can't get a word in edgeways, might as well leave him to it." We always enjoyed having a bit of fun. And that's what I remember about Sid. He was darn good fun. He was a really, really top-rate commentator. He was disappointed about one thing. I know, it's just come to my mind. He was in line, for being the announcer of the National Lottery. Every Saturday night on telly, every Wednesday night on telly, doing the lottery numbers. And he'd obviously auditioned people. He said, "Well, anyway, if you didn't know Sid Waddell's voice, you didn't know anybody's." And he'd set his heart on this, and I think he genuinely thought that he had a great chance of securing the job. And he didn't get it. And I know how disappointed he was. It would have meant a lot to him. But he got over it and got on with life. And he's a very positive individual, really. But he's human, and he had his disappointment. But what a man. 8 years now since he's gone. He would have been 80. He'd have had one heck of a celebration for an 80th birthday, and I probably would still be listening to him on the airwaves. I'd probably still be sitting next to him if he was still alive. I doubt whether I'd have retired when I did, but there we are.
And lastly, before we let you go, John, and you touched on it there, today is 8 years since Sid sadly passed, and darts fans still talk about him very fondly. Of course, we've had some tributes already this week going out to Sid, but how do you think the darts world remembers Sid now?
Well, he'll always be remembered because of the Sid Waddell Trophy World Championship, and you know my views on that. They should have waited, and the World Match Play should be the Sid Waddell Trophy, because that was his favourite tournament. It was, as we've already said, it was the first and the last full tournament that he participated in as a commentator on Sky and for the BBC. But I'm not going to dwell on that. He's got the name of the World Championship trophy honoured, and the first time that was presented, Dave Lanning came out of retirement and sat with me in the 3D commentary box, the 3D one that they had for a time, not the main one. And Dave and I did the commentary on the final stages of that final, and Dave was very, very emotional because he and Sid had been friends since the indoor games of the early 70s. They'd been friends for 40 years. And Dave became quite emotional in the final stages of that 2012 final. Yes, Sid will be remembered. But people will just remember him because of his uniqueness. The great thing is so many of those commentaries are there now, preserved for anybody to pick up from YouTube or any other sources. And they're there forever. And that's good for posterity. Because in years to come, and I mean many years to come, the memory of all of us will fade, but the evidence won't. The evidence will still be there. People say, goodness me, that Sid Waddell, he was something different, wasn't he? Even in 40, 50 years' time. And that sums him up. He was different, but by Jove, he was brilliant. I'm very proud, A, to have worked with him for so many years, and B, to have known the guy anyway.